As you know, millions of Americans are in a situation where every single dollar counts. A majority of Americans don't have any money saved. So at a time like this, why are we letting these bozos blow our money on 2 new museums in Washington and $10 million on gender studies in Pakistan? Here with me to discuss, Texas Republican Congressman, House Budget Committee and House Freedom Caucus member Chip Roy, who voted against this garbage. Welcome to the show, sir.
Good evening, Kennedy. Thanks for having me on.
So let's talk about this a little bit. It has been described as legislative malpractice. How do you feel about that?
Well, look, it's absolutely absurd what the leadership of the Republican Party and Democrats allowed to occur yesterday. In fact, did it on purpose, jamming us with a 6,000-page bill that we literally got yesterday afternoon around 2:30, and had a couple of hours to review before we had our first vote on it, the rule vote, in the evening. Yeah, friends like the Freedom Caucus were all about opposing the bill. But unfortunately, the vast majority of Republicans supported this porker of a legislation. And while Alexandria was talking all day about how the bill was a bad bill and the process was terrible, she ended up voting for it. This is what happens when we reward leadership by continuing to support these bad bills. It's filled with unnecessary legislation and spending, obviously for things like Pakistan and gender studies in Pakistan for $25 million, $87 million to Sudan, all sorts of foreign aid spending. But it also funds the very things that are attacking American institutions. $82 billion for education, for schools to not teach our kids anything and to be shut down and fund the teachers' unions. Why on earth would we do that? The only good news out of this, Kennedy, is this. I think the American people are now seeing behind the curtain. They're seeing what a normal spending bill, an omnibus appropriations bill looks like, because they thought this was all something for small businesses, for COVID relief and for people hurting. Now they see what their big federal government does every year, sticking it to them, passing this debt down to our kids and grandkids. So I hope now the American people see what's in these disastrous bills.
Yeah, no way of paying for it. All we're doing is blowing up creating deficits and blowing up the debt. It is awful because if you've got generations of people who, they're going to be discouraged to get into medicine because we will further socialize medicine, and they will be disincentivized to create new cool things because they're just going to get taxed for their brilliance and great ideas, then you're going to have an entire generation of people who are just going to give up. And that's how societies fall apart. There's so much in here that is unconscionable, but Justin Amash brings up a really good point. I know he's no longer popular with Republicans since he became a libertarian, which I think is great. But no amendments? You cannot even debate and amend something like this? How is there not? How have you all not written laws against this sort of legislative malpractice?
Well, Kennedy, I'm glad you asked. This is actually one of the most egregious things going on in Washington. Justin happens to be one of my best friends in D.C. I'm going to miss him terribly. That he's a libertarian doesn't matter to me. He's a good friend. He believes in the Constitution, limited government, reducing spending, and I agree with him. Thomas Massey, another good friend. But do you know what? The American people will be blown away. We have not had an amendment on the floor of the House of Representatives since May of 2016, where a member can go to the floor and offer an amendment on a piece of legislation without the blessing of leadership.
Wow.
That's what's wrong with Washington. They cook up bills in back rooms. They jam them down on the floor like they did yesterday. $2.3 trillion, take it or leave it. You have to wonder, why does the Republican Party even exist? It basically exists to say that they're pro-life and, basically to oppose Democrats. But they're sure as hell not standing up together to fight spending, to stop the socialization of medicine, to stop indoctrinating our kids with hating America, to stop endless wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which is what we see Republicans getting behind. When are we going to stand up for the small businesses, the hardworking men and women who are out there working hard, instead of the crony capitalism and the corruption in Washington, D.C., and stop continuing to grow government at the expense of liberty? When are we going to open businesses and stop small local governments from shutting down restaurants and small businesses? When are we going to stand up for the people?
Yeah, and that's what I talked about in my monologue last night, was the cronyism in the COVID relief. Because, you're talking about the people whose restaurants and businesses close for good because of the decisions of a few people who happen to be in power and, well-pensioned people who don't have to worry about where their next paycheck or where their retirement is coming from. But the first round of COVID relief, it didn't even help them. We were talking about last night, 38% of people who applied for relief didn't get it. We're talking about small businesses. And then you had major corporations like AT&T and Wells Fargo who got corporate welfare and still laid people off. It's incredible. So no offense, but Congress is doing something wrong.
Hey, no offense taken at all. I couldn't agree more. It's what I've been saying on social media as long as I can. You asked the question why we let it happen. Because the majority body, the House, comes in and they adopt rules by majority. And then a backbencher freshman Republican like me, I can't go to the floor against those rules. So we need to come together. We need Democrats and Republicans to rise up and say enough of that. Let's go to the floor. Let's retake the people's house and let's debate and amend and vote. What are they afraid of? Let's do our job like the American people are doing their job and stop screwing them every day, which is what Congress is doing.
Well done, Congressman Chip Roy. I appreciate your words and your time. Thanks again.
Thanks, Kevin.